Welcome, everybody. I am Kim Wilson, and I'm delighted to welcome the Digital Portfolios of the Poor team and all of you that are logging in from around the world. This is truly a pleasure from the dark and chilly Boston, Massachusetts. I'm also pleased to welcome our panelists, Sayonee, Chatterjee from Vaani in India, an organization I admire greatly, Tamara Cook from FSD Kenya, Mehr Shah from Karandaaz, Pakistan, and Isaiah Owolabi from our partner in Nigeria. Your organizations are fundamental in the success of this project, and welcome. I'm with the Fletcher School at Tufts University, and a very good friend of Daryl Collins, who is our featured guest today. So Digital Portfolios of the Poor, or as we say, DPP, seeks to understand the gender differences in the digital lives of the poor, enabling action to close gender gaps in digital financial services and access to those services to make them more effective and gender transformational in future projects and current projects. As you know, there is a digital divide, and DPP seeks to understand really what the nuances of that divide really are. So today you'll learn more from our co-principal investigator, Daryl. So Daryl, it's a pleasure to have you, about how Decodis, the firm she founded, uses tech-led methods to really listen to what respondents are saying and achieve actionable results that allow us as a community to put together these portfolios. We will then hear from field partners in 4 countries about the relevance of this particular work. So the chat will remain open for the whole event for you to ask questions, and we encourage everyone to post your questions and reactions, and we will ask them and we will forward them to our panelists. So now a brief introduction. Daryl is the CEO and founder of the social research firm Decodis, and I think many of you might know her from the book Portfolios of the Poor. Decodis uses tech-led techniques to elevate the voices of vulnerable populations. And you're going to learn a little bit about those techniques today. She also serves as a senior fellow at the Leir Institute, which is the institute I'm also part of at the Fletcher School. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to, excuse me here, to Daryl to talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. So anyway, and I also want to say Daryl is a dear friend, and she is going to be my co-author on a book about migration. So Daryl, welcome, and I'm turning the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Kim. Yeah, Kim has to be a dear friend because it's 6 o'clock in the morning here in Boston. So yeah, we wanted to make sure that we had a launch yesterday, which was, more of the Americas time zone, but, there's more reasonable times than, that time for everyone else. So we were hoping that we could make this as broad as possible. My name is Daryl Collins, as Kim mentioned, and I want to thank you for joining us, and also thank our panelists, Tamara, Sayonee, Mehr, and Isaiah, who I'm very grateful, because I'll be listening to hear what they think about what this project might unveil. So let me be clear, this Digital Portfolios of the Poor project, which is sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we don't have results right now. We're at the very beginning. We finished data collection in India, and we're this close right now to finishing our data collection in Kenya, and then we'll move on to Pakistan early in the next year. But we want to be quite collaborative and socialize early with this project, because we think that it could be a new set of evidence that might be important for the future. So that's why we wanted to have this initial launch, to tell you what we're hoping to find and tease out some examples, some early examples from India about what we think we're going to find. So let me sort of set this up. Let me tell you, what were we thinking when we were starting this whole set of research? So this year in in the middle of the year, around June, we had two sets of evidence that were really important that tell us something about the gender digital divide and digital finance divide. So first of all, Findex, which is a financial inclusion, large world financial inclusion survey produced by the World Bank, came out and said, okay, in terms of having a formal financial account, the gender gap has actually contracted. And the percentage of people in low and middle income countries specifically have, it's pretty high for people to have a formal account. However, usage was kind of interesting because during COVID, usage of digital financial services, or DFS, the gender gap actually increased there because both men and women were using digital financial services more, but men increased more than women. So we actually had a widening from 11 to 16. So that tells us, that doesn't bode well for the digital divide. And then we had information from the GSMA, from the Mobile Gender Gap publication that they produce every few years. And that was really worrying, where they found that usage in mobile internet, the gender gap had widened to 16 basis points, and it reversed in sort of an upward trend, or a downward trend, excuse me. In other words, the gender divide was narrowing, and now for the first time it increased. So, okay. And the GSMA report also cited that, men and women talked about the same barrier, where they said, look, I have a problem with digital literacy, and that's the reason why I don't use the internet more. But that just doesn't seem to make sense, because we do see men using the internet more. So wait a minute, what do we do about this is really what my concern is, that we don't really know what's going on. We know that usage is lower for women than for men in all sorts of digital services, including DFS. And that gap seems to be widening, but we don't know what to do about it. And I think one of the reasons why we don't know what to do about it is because we don't have the greatest diagnosis. What is keeping that usage low? What would move it forward? There could be any number of reasons. So that's what we're trying to pick out in this project. And let me give you an example from India of what we're seeing and how we might see it. So let me give you an example of Meena and Arjun. They're both in the India sample, and they're very similar. We picked them for their equivalence. They're roughly the same age. They both live sort of in a pretty rural area, not close to any big cities. They both have a shared smartphone. So they have a smartphone, but it's shared in the household. They earn roughly the same amount. She's in a household, but he's supporting a whole family. So that per capita income is quite different. Neither one of them have a bank account. And then again, the whole sort of family situation is very different. He is sort of the head of the family, and she is married to someone who is a migrant. And then she lives with her parents and her siblings and aunt and uncle, and she has 2 kids. So they hold very different seniority positions in the household, one might think. And I think that naturally plays out in the type of agency and the type of comfort that they feel in their physical lives, but then also in their digital lives. So let's look at what that means. Well, when we think of portfolios, when we thought about financial diaries, a big part of that is tracking money over time. Now, with digital portfolios, we're not going to track over time because digital usage doesn't have the same type of relationship to time that money has. But what we are going to do is look at the whole portfolio of digital services. So that means, as you see here, we're nesting our view of digital financial services within a view of how do people behave on the whole and how do they see themselves in their digital world. So again, you see a lot of equivalence where both Meena and Arjun, they use a lot of messaging and videos, and they're pretty much equivalent in terms of the frequency of use. Now, social media, Arjun uses social media a bit more than Meena, but they both use it. Meena uses games, whereas Arjun doesn't. And Meena has a little bit more usage of news and information. But the big thing that we want to zero in on is that with respect to digital financial services, they both use digital financial services, but Meena uses it a lot less. So we have exactly the type of problem that we're trying to figure out. The same portfolio of services and access to DFS, but a lot less usage. So here's just unpacking that less usage. What is part of that? Well, part of it is less use cases. So Meena uses phone pay, and she just simply receives money from her husband, usually just for emergencies, and usually relatively small amounts of money. So she's got one use case that she knows well, and she doesn't use it often, but that's it. Whereas Arjun uses GPay, and he's using it for mobile top-up, and he's using it to make payments, and he's using it to receive payments. And if you think about it, I mean, that's pretty fluid. Someone just using mobile top-up or sort of some of these high frequency digital financial service use cases is a certain type of user who might be sort of accessing different types of services. But when you're actually receiving payment and you're sending payments and receiving payments, that's a more fluid user. Now, what we don't know is, will these two examples be the same across the rest of this 1,000 sample in India? And will it be the same in the 1,000 samples of each of the three countries that come next? Will we see the same type of differential in the use cases? We don't know yet. That's what we're going to be looking into. Let me deepen the story, because we also want to understand the mindset behind people in the digital world and what their philosophies are about the digital safety that they experience, their fears, what they get from the digital world, how they manage themselves in the digital world and their philosophies about that versus the physical world. So here's an example of Meena and her. We really found a lot of concerns about money and digital with her, but her fear of DFS really struck out. So this quote tells you that what happened. She actually received 5,000 rupees from her husband, a lot of money, right? And I think part of her fear was sort of heightened because this was quite a bit of money. So he sent her, this big chunk of change, and he wanted her to transfer it into his bank account. And she got very, very anxious about it. So the first thing that we do to pick apart and understand this evidence is we do natural language processing to pick out particular words that might have a particular meaning. So fear, money, stuck. There was a fear of losing money. And then there was also sent, returned, fear went away, sort of this reassurance of redressal. So there's something about that. She was nervous about losing money, but what made the fear go away was her reassurance of redressal. Also, what comes through is this sense of, I'm afraid I'm going to do something wrong and I'm not going to be able to reverse it. So who holds the blame for something going wrong is, I think, going to be something really, really important. Do women blame themselves, whereas men blame the company? I don't know if we're going to see that, but that's one thing that we'll be looking for. Let me actually also have you listen to her voice, because that's the second piece of information that we use to tease out what's going on. What is she afraid of? Is she really afraid? And how does that compare? This is what we call a pitch line. And pitch, this is the sound of her voice. And pitch is, high pitch is when her voice goes high, and lower is when it goes low. And what you see when people talk, you have a lot of pitch modulation, and that means that they're very engaged. When you see the pitch run higher, that tends to mean more anxiety. Let you listen. So our conclusion with this is that when she's talking it through, we can not only see the words that she's saying, but we can match it to sort of this heightened pitch and heightened anxiety. So there is definitely a lot of fear of DFS, but we don't know how to fix it. Is it sort of money? Is it financial literacy? Oh, I'm nervous about handling money. Is it digital literacy? Is it I'm nervous in the digital world? Or is it I need redressal, I need this? We're not absolutely sure what the solution is yet. So what we did is we looked at her emotions with a few other things. So we took something physical to do with money, which is a savings group or a self-help group in this situation, which for women is usually where they're quite comfortable with self-help groups and with saving among them. EFInA is no different. We asked her, oh, are you worried about something with your SHG? You know, people seeing your money or the money getting stolen, or I don't know, somebody, are you worried? Do you feel sort of concerned about your privacy? And you can see here that she said, what, are you crazy? No, of course I'm, what? What? I don't even know what you're talking about. Then she goes on and she talks about calculating percents, which in my experience, usually people will express percent as like 10 on 100. But she's speaking in this like relatively financially sophisticated way by talking through in a very fluid way what percent means. So here's her pitch chart. And you can see that her pitch goes much sort of smoother, it gets lower, which means that she's just calmer, and you can hear it here. So with this, she's much calmer. Her pitch is calmer, she's more confident. So I don't think that sort of numeric literacy or financial literacy is really the problem here. When it comes to money, she's actually really comfortable with a lot of these concepts and topics. So let's now move on to how she felt about WhatsApp, where we said, okay, of all these different digital products you use, which is the best? And she said, WhatsApp. WhatsApp is wonderful. She uses WhatsApp in the context of her work, and she works with an NGO and uses WhatsApp to communicate with her colleagues. So she's learned it with sort of within the comfort of friends and the comfort of sort of a team. And you can see here that she's quite confident. Now, what's interesting is that she's got a quite calmer pitch in the beginning of this quote when she's talking about WhatsApp. And then she starts to get a bit anxious. And she says, well, you know, I don't use my phone much. There's almost kind of this concern and sort of a defensiveness around, well, you know, I use Facebook a bit, I use WhatsApp, I don't use anything more. So there's a bit of what we would call content visibility, where we think part of what she's concerned about is that people will see her just kind of messing around on the phone when she should be doing her work and her housework as well. So there's a bit of mixed emotion here. But when she's talking about WhatsApp, she's talking about, she's quite calm and she feels quite positive, and she talks for a long time. Let me just play just a little bit. So she's definitely more confident and casual, pretty much as much as when she was talking about her self-help group. And so it doesn't seem like it's digital literacy for sure. I mean, she doesn't have problems pressing the buttons on the phone. She doesn't have problems with WhatsApp, but she also learned WhatsApp within the comfort of a group. So what we're trying to get at is, where are these emotions coming from? What part of the portfolio are they applied to? So this is all the different pitch charts, and you can see the fear of the DFS, a lot of pitch going quite a bit higher than what you see on the comfort with the SHG and when she's talking about WhatsApp. Now let me show you something. Let me compare to Arjun. And this is when we said to Arjun, what are you worried about with using DFS? And he was sort of like, oh, it's fine. Yeah, we put the pin in, it's fine, the money gets transferred. He's downright nonchalant. His whole slope is just like, yeah, what are you talking about? And it's very interesting when we talk about these different broader digital fears. Sometimes the men really are like, I really don't even understand your question. What is there to be afraid of exactly? Whereas the women are saying, yes, I'm really concerned about this and I'm really concerned about that. So you can see actually here, he only talks for 11 seconds. Where she's a chatty Cathy, she's talking for twice as long. She's got a lot to say, where he's like, it's fine. Doesn't even occur to me to be nervous about this. Now, that sort of gets through a bit more of a diagnosis of what the problem with this usage of DFS might be in terms of emotion and how people are feeling about their confidence in using DFS. But we don't know if this is going to be true for the rest of the sample. We don't know if it's going to be true across other countries. And we don't know what else we're going to find through all the data that we're collecting. So, but we do know that we need a better diagnosis than Mita does not trust DFS. Well, I don't know if it's that she doesn't trust DFS or she doesn't trust herself to use DFS. And she doesn't trust herself to be able to unwind things if things go wrong. And she doesn't really need more digital literacy because she was able to handle WhatsApp like very confidently. So it's not as though she really has this big barrier about digital in general. And it isn't as though she really needs more financial literacy. And those might be some of the diagnosis that we might come to from the first information that we saw. My point here is that we absolutely need Findex and the GSMA gender divide reports and data. We absolutely need FinAccess and all the different financial surveys, because we need to know where the hotspots are. We need to know what the trends are. But we're also reaching a point now where I think we're a little stuck, and our basis of diagnosis needs to be deeper. We need to get further down into the weeds, into what people are saying, to really understand what is blocking this usage and not encouraging women to use just as much as men. So I just want to tell you very briefly how we do this. So the way we collect the digital portfolios, we use interactive voice recording, which is IVR. In other words, respondents just need a handset and they just speak into the phone or maybe press a button. There's nothing to download or anything like that. And we have, instead of filling out a questionnaire or having somebody live in front of you, you actually have this voice asking you the questions. Now, we choose that voice incredibly carefully. We have a woman's voice talking to a woman. We absolutely use local language, but we can also use local dialect. We throw in specific words. We try to use even local slang if it works well, because then people feel like, oh, this is for me. We're signaling that we want you to talk in your most comfortable language, because then people will talk for longer. We've actually found that when you do a discourse analysis between an interviewer and a respondent, the interviewer is constantly interrupting the respondent or leading them or talking over them. It happens a lot more than you might think. And it's not because the interviewer isn't well trained, it's because they're human. And for an interviewer who's doing a live interview, this is a job and they're trying to get all the way through the questionnaire. Otherwise, they won't get paid for that interview. And they're trying to get through so many interviews in a day so they can get paid for a full day's work. And they want to finish the interview, they want to complete it fully, and then they want to go home and make dinner. So that's why you might find even very well-trained interviewers pushing the interview along and pushing the respondent to give an answer and therefore give a particular answer. With this system, you don't have that. You also don't have this highly educated interviewer or better educated interviewer talking to usually a respondent who's less educated. And therefore, the respondent usually feels like they need to answer correctly. They're very anxious to say the right thing. In this situation, we set up a whole scenario where the respondent just feels that they can talk and talk, and there's no judgment, no social judgment. Whatever they say is the right answer. And therefore, we get better data, we think, that way. Respondents can also answer whenever they want. Midnight, 4 a.m, after the kids go to bed. So it's easier. They don't have to keep an appointment with an interviewer. So the result is that respondents feel consulted, not studied, and then they talk for longer and give more details. Now, that's how we also are able to collect all of this data for 4,000 respondents across 4 countries. We get qualitative information that scales, and you can make IVR calls, you can make 4,000 of them and collect that data all at the same time if you set it up that way. So it's more agile, it's quicker, it's scalable, tends to be cheaper. So how do we ask about these topics like cybersecurity or, how do you feel about your digital footprint? You can't use those words and they're abstract and people aren't sure what you're talking about. It's really hard to get that type of nuanced topic. So what we do is we create skits and then people comment on the skit rather than trying to get across what we're trying to ask about in just one word or one phrase. So here's an example in Kenya about digital lending. And we set up a whole scenario. And this is a woman who had increasing loans, but then she needed to use one and she's gotten herself into a little bit of trouble.
Nilidhani unaendelea vizuri. Nini ilifanyika?
Nilikuwa sawa lakini nikapatwa na dharura. Unajua kwa miaka 2 sasa, nimekuwa nikichukua mikopo ya kidijitali kupitia simu yangu na kulipa vizuri katika muda ufaao. Kiwango changu nachoruhusiwa kuchukua mikopo kikaongezeka. Bahati mbaya, kijana wangu akalazwa hospitalini.
Oh, pole sana. Kwa hiyo
bila hospitali ikakuwa kubwa sana, ikanibidi nichukue.
So then we ask respondents to comment on the skit. What do you think? Is this a problem? What would you do? What do you think is going to happen next? And then suddenly they're commenting on these very abstract ideas like creating a digital footprint that will give you loans, but on the other hand, could get you into trouble by getting you overextended. And we're working with a number of different field partners. Vaani is not only our thought partner, but also has helped us execute in India. And then we're working with a number of different NGOs in Kenya right now, and we'll be working in the other 2 countries soon. So just to wind this up, why does any of this matter? Well, we're trying to get a deeper diagnosis of what's going on with how people behave in the digital world so that we can increase the likelihood of getting an effective solution. So in the case of Mehr, does she need a supervisory solution? Like, supervisors making sure that digital providers have a good redressal system? Is it a product feature like that note that came up that reassured her that her money wasn't going to go anywhere, that it wasn't supposed to? Is it some sort of educational program that says, here's how you navigate the digital world? Is it some combination? We're trying to increase the likelihood that we put the right programs and the right combination of programs together so that it can become more effective and people can guide the digital world that they're now inevitably growing into in a much more comfortable way, and especially for women. So let me stop there and hand it back to you, Kim.
Daryl, this is great. And I'm looking at the chat and I'm seeing some wonderful questions here, and we will be turning the questions over to the people asking them. But I just want to say, I'm fascinated by this for a couple of reasons. One is the process. And I don't want to take the thunder out of some of our commenters' questions. I have the same ones. But what I love, being a researcher myself, I love that you're responding to this idea that the respondent often, when they're questioned in person, is feeling like they're having to pass a test. I see this over and over again. It could be people in the US I'm interviewing, or people that my students in their native tongue are interviewing overseas, that people are feeling like, I want to please you and I want to give you the right answer. Just tell me to answer so that I can please you. And it's that idea of passing the test that makes you wonder how valid the responses are. And I love that you are coming up with another way to make them not, first of all, not feel like that, because that's our footprint as researchers, making people feel poorly about talking. That's we shouldn't do that. And also the idea of the enumerator really needing to tend to their lives, and they need to go home, and it's 6 p.m. and they've got to cook dinner for a family and they're dying to get out of there, and they've got just 5 more people they have to go interview, and so I really think on a process level, I love this idea. I guess on a big question level, I'm curious that you showed very strikingly how Mina has a calm voice in a certain setting. Why are we trying to design products for her that make her calmer, as opposed to take our products? And so I guess what I'm saying is, what's wrong with joining a group? She's very calm about it. Why should we bother trying to find digital ways of making her happy when she's perfectly happy with her analog and physical way of dealing with the world? So I guess that's my kind of overarching question. And I don't expect you to answer that, but just to say that I find philosophically, are we missing something when we are trying to bridge this digital divide, when maybe she's onto something and we should listen to her? So I just wonder about that. So what I'd like to do now is turn some of these wonderful questions over to our panelists. And our panelists, to remind everybody, are Sayonee Chatterjee, and she's the Director of Gender and Child Rights at Vaani Community Media, which is a social tech company building a unified platform of social media for the bottom of the pyramid. And she has previously written about the application of mobile phones and social media to improve grievance redressal in public services. And she holds a master's degree in sociology from the University of Pune. Tamara Cook is the CEO of FSD Financial Services Deepening Kenya. She joined FSD Kenya in 2014 as the head of digital innovations, with a focus on using finance to create value for low-income households, women, and enterprises. With more than 2 decades of experience in inclusive finance, Tamara has also worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, CGAP, and Equity Bank in Kenya. She holds an MBA from INSEAD and a BA in International Affairs with George Washington Universities. Mehr Shah is Director of Knowledge Management and Communications. And by the way, I'm reading these in the order of the implementation, so of the program. So we have started with India first. We've then moved on to Kenya, and now we're talking about Pakistan. Mehr Shah focuses on improving access to finance among SMEs and individuals in Pakistan. Ms. Shah worked closely with the State Bank of Pakistan to develop the regulatory framework for licensing of digital banks. Mehr is a Fulbright Scholar and holds an MBA in Finance from Syracuse University's Martin J. Whitman School of Management, and a Bachelor's in Science and Economics from the Lahore University of Management Sciences in Pakistan. And then last but absolutely not least is Isaiah Owolabi, who's the CEO of Enhancing Financial Innovation and Access, which is a financial sector deepening, FSD, in Nigeria. He is also the co-founder of Hasey Health Initiative, a development organization to improve the health and economic outcomes of underserved women and girls. Mr. Owolabi has received from Queen Elizabeth herself a Young Leader Award for his impact in development work. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Human Physiology and studied public administration at Columbia University. So we have an esteemed group of panelists, and I welcome them warmly. And now I'm wondering if we can't turn over a couple of these questions to them. So I've been looking at the chat, and one question that has come up, which I'd like to toss out to you right away, which is, are these voice patterns across culture? Are you measuring the patterns across cultures? Are you measuring against their own speech? Right? Is it individual to individual and not worrying about the cultural implications? So if you could tell us a little bit more about how you're looking at pitch across these different dimensions, that would be helpful, Daryl.
Yeah, the short answer is that we're normalizing the pitch against people's own voices. So what it really is not this person has a high pitch, it's this person has a high pitch on this question and a low pitch on that question. So that's where the normalization happens, and that's how we do this across languages and across people's particular voices. To answer that question, but I'd love to jump in and ask specific questions of the panelists before we get to the Q&A.
Let's do that.
Would that be possible? That'd be great, because I'm dying to hear from them.
Yes,
this is all just about us hearing from them.
Well, so I think we have this common big question of how are these pitches being looked at? And then now let's turn to our panelists and get some responses from you all. And maybe let's start in the order that, if you don't mind, that I presented you. So Sayonee, would you care to jump in a little bit here?
Hi, everyone. Sure. I am audible fine, right?
Yes, you sound.
Right. So where should I start from? I mean, there is so much to share because there was a learning curve for us as well, since it was this entire exercise of understanding the entire concept from Daryl. It's something very new. So any particular thing that you would like me to start on, and then probably the flow is going to take it over.
Daryl?
Sayonee, you were here from the beginning with us, but I'd love you to back up a bit and take a broader perspective. And how do you see some of the results of this study influencing different partners that you work with in India as a whole? Because you work right across nearly the whole country. And I think it's, who might be influenced and how. And that will give us some tricks for, what do we need to look at? What do we need to look for?
Great. Thanks for the cue, Daryl. So so like you already mentioned that we at Vaani work primarily with those who do not have, who are at the bottom of the pyramid. And Daryl mentioned several stats about, owning a bank account, having, kind of smart devices or using or accessing them. And she also highlighted that those indicators might not be enough to come to a conclusion about certain things. So with the initial results and being a part of this entire exercise, what I understood is that it's going to provide us a way more nuanced context, identify different and also categorize indicators. So different indicators, identification of that, categorization of that, how can they be used to come to certain rough conclusions in the beginning, and maybe they can again be tested. So for example, like we keep saying that, for example, certain data like the National Health Family Survey highlights that so many percentage of women owns a bank account. What does that mean, right? Or maybe so many percentage, there's a percentage increase in women using digital device. What does that mean? Does that mean that the digital divide, the gender digital divide is reducing? Even if it is, where is it leading to? And more importantly, what are some of the factors? The factors like, for example, do I have limited knowledge on digital information, digital literacy? Is the source from which I'm getting that knowledge, what is that source, right? Is that source authentic? Or who am I being influenced with? For example, someone introduced an UPI app to me and I trust that person. I don't know about that app. I'm using that app. I don't know about the safety protocols of that app. So is an app being introduced through SAG setup carries more value, right? So all these kind of nuances, because it is not only digital literacy, it is digital, it is financial, and the factors that are at play. For example, I know everything, but I'm apprehensive of using social media to promote my digital, my entrepreneurship venture. I do not know what digital footprint is, or I am scared that someone else is going to raise a finger on me. So there are social norms that are also at play. So coming back to the question, how this is going to help, I believe that when we decide, when we develop concept notes, when we frame policies, so a wide range of stakeholders essentially, we go with an understanding of the need. So one, this is going to highlight more of those kind of nuanced needs, right? Second, when we decide that we are going to run a campaign on such and such thing, right? Is a knowledge about digital literacy important? Is a knowledge about cybersecurity important? Is it my attitude towards using of these? Is it the attitude of the community towards a woman or someone else using these is problematic? So that will provide us a lot of understanding to devise such kind of engagement strategies. What more, I believe, is that it covers a huge range. So it is across country, it is across culture, but at the bottom, at the core of this are the intersectionalities of the individuals, which are very critical to understand before just laying out a very generic kind of, policies and campaigns. So yeah, so I believe this is going to lead us to develop more robust checks and balances and steps to encourage, promote, as well as safeguard the digital portfolio, especially of those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. Yeah.
Sayonee, I think that is really beautiful. And what I'm hearing from you in this comment is it's not just this study, it's this whole method that could even reveal new research questions. And that also is what I'm excited about, because there's parameters for this actual study, but there's so much more here that I think is very, very rich. So I really resonate with your thinking. Tamara, may I turn it over to you to make a comment?
So I think what I'm excited about with this particular research is I feel that it complements the other research and data sources that we have about Kenya. Anybody who knows FSD Kenya knows that I'm going to talk about FinAccess because it is such a robust survey that tells a lot about the financial inclusion landscape in Kenya. But one of the things about it is that it almost begs more whys than it tells us, right? And so how can research like this help answer some of the whys behind the questions? And because we're talking about kind of digital literacy, digital financial literacy, I mean, I think even just pure literacy is a challenge, right? So in one of our FinAccess questions, we show people a text and we say, can you read this? Well, 18% of women can't even read it, right? And so maybe an IVR technology could read it to them. Would that help? And like, what are the ways that digital can help that? 14% of women can read it. They can read the words out to you, but they do not understand what it means. And so even if I've got a text and I can read it, even if it's a, a small phone, if I can't interpret it. And so how can digital be used with imagery, with things that can help people understand what's happening, I think is really powerful. I think in Kenya, we've got a very digital economy. We like to say that the digital economy in Kenya is inevitable. However, whether or not it is inclusive or not is still to be determined. And I think the risk of a growing divide where people who have that digital literacy, have the access to the digital financial literacy, services and are using them robustly, are going to be opened up to more economic opportunities than their counterparts. And so that's something that we're really looking at. And I think studies like this can help to uncover that. And some of the hot topics in Kenya would be digital credit. And I won't say a lot about that because I'm sure the survey will do, but the skit that Daryl showed looked like a conversation that I've seen, right? And then mobile betting is something that I don't know if that's covered in there, but your gaming, there's a difference between playing, Angry Birds and, betting the food money on the World Cup. So, how do we think about some of those things? I think I'd also love to see some age, looking at youth versus old, like what's going on there. And then across the country. And so one of the things that I find is that, Kenya is a smaller country than India. And I know India is very diverse from place to place. But even within Kenya, we've just analyzed all the FinAccess data by county. And the differences are extreme in terms of you think of Kenya as financially included, and you think of our gender gap is 4.2%, but the county that I was in last week, the gender gap is 15%. What's going on there? And how can surveys like this help us understand the why behind those gaps across regions, across ages, across livelihoods? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. Tamara, all the things that you're saying, I completely agree with. And I like how you want to tease apart more some of the age issues and looking at things geographically versus just kind of Kenya as a whole. And I also agree that IVR could really complement some of the kinds of assessments that you're already doing. So I'm super excited about what this is going to show for Kenya. But also, I think, shed light on some of these other kinds of questions that you're concerned about, such as digital credit and digital betting. I think those are kind of explosive trends that are happening, certainly in your area, but we see it also happening right here in the US with mobile betting now becoming, not only legal, but encouraged. Mehr, I'm wondering if you could comment on what this kind of study would mean for you in Pakistan and Karandaaz.
Thank you, Kim. Hello to all our audience from Islamabad. For those of our listeners who may not be aware of Karandaaz, I'm going to take a minute to introduce Karandaaz, which is a non-profit company registered in Pakistan. We're sponsored by the United Kingdom's FCDO and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we have two major areas. One is improving finance for unserved and underserved individuals. And the second is MSMEs. We generally use conventional debt and equity investments, but we have a major focus on catalyzing the uptake and the provision of digital financial services in the country. So within this mix, gender or improving access to finance for women and women-led businesses is a cross-cutting aspiration. Now, why do I say aspiration? Because Pakistan continues to have a persisting and chronic gender gap, not only on financial inclusion, but in a range of other areas. And I say this to kind of bring to the front the utility and the value of the DPP study, which we're going to start undertaking in Pakistan in the first quarter of 2023. The gender gap is particularly perplexing in Pakistan because, when we look at reports like the GSMA report, it shows to us that for South Asia as a whole, the broadband access to the mobile broadband network has improved and the gap has widened, the coverage gap. But what has not improved is the usage gap. So despite there being access, why is it that the usage gap between the urban and the rural areas and male and female populations has widened? Now, these are very, these are persisting questions in Pakistan, and this gender gap has been especially stubborn to bring down. So within this context, there are several aspects of the DPP study that are of a lot of interest to Karandaaz. Of course, the first and at the top of the list is the focus on women, given that a larger proportion of this sample under the DPP study is going to be comprised of female respondents. So looking at our gender gaps, it is clear that we seem to be missing something, given our conventional standard data collection methods and our research methods. So I have great hope that the DPP study will shine a light on and tease out the facets that we may have overlooked. So that is, sort of one of the first areas of interest for us. The second is the focus of the DPP on low-income households in urban as well as in rural areas, because service providers have over the last few years really doubled down in their efforts to capture hotly contested population segments within limited geographies. This leaves large swathes of the country insufficiently serviced or even excluded. So I think this focus on the low income and the poor, as well as on rural, is something which Pakistan really needs to focus on, and it's going to be an area of tremendous interest for us in Pakistan. Undoubtedly, the most fascinating aspect in the DPP's broad approach is also its focus on the digital portfolio of the respondent. So, sort of a number of the commentators have spoken on this before. But rather than having a singular focus on finance or on health or on cash transfers, as Daryl explained, the study will take a portfolio approach. And as Director Communications at Karandaaz, I am already aware that, digital, advertising revenue in Pakistan has seen a shift from standard platforms to advertise via, which is television, radio, print, and it's moving to digital channels. Spend on the latter now comprises approximately 22% of annual advertising revenue in the country. And the DPP promises to provide an up-close and personal view of how that spend should really be structured. So the granularity that Sayonee mentioned, that Tamara mentioned, that granularity is what we're going to find very, very valuable. And last but not least, sort of Karandaaz is also extremely excited to be involved in this initiative as we become familiarized with a completely new set of research skills that will be leveraging technology and that will significantly drive down the cost of research. Karandaaz is currently involved in running the 7th edition of the nationally and provincially representative Financial Inclusion Insights Survey. And I'm acutely aware of the quantum of resources and time involved in taking a survey from start to finish, while constantly also fighting the urge to load up the survey with every conceivable question. So, what now does that mean for the types of insights that we hope this study will provide us? I'm sure the audience has already been putting down a lot, and sort of my fellow respondents have also given insight on some of the questions. For Pakistan, it will be extremely useful to develop a more granular insight into the digital lives of the rural and the peri-urban women. I think that is really an area of interest for us. I'm keenly aware that we need to answer these questions afresh, because post-COVID Pakistan is changing. I'll give an example from my own home where our domestic staff gave away his smartphone to his wife because it was more useful in the farthest mountain regions of Chitral, Pakistan, so his children could access education materials on the smartphone. His children are now back at school, but the smartphone remains with his wife in Chitral, while he himself makes do with a feature phone in the city of Islamabad. And I suspect that, post-COVID, we're going to be, will be seeing a lot of this through when the DPP study is rolled out. On the policy side, I would again, sort of like to refer back to a conversation that I had with a senior staff member of a digital bank earlier this year. The bank is already operating in several countries. I was intrigued to learn that as part of its rollout plan in all its markets, the bank forecasts equal, if not greater, financial resources towards client awareness raising, education, and onboarding that it has put into its technology solution. So on the policy and service provider front, I would like for the DPP research to to give us even more clarity in Pakistan and a more detailed answer on this question. Do we need to allocate more resources towards digital and financial literacy and consumer protection in Pakistan? And if yes, how? So, I think I've gone a little over my time limit, but
it's
back
really
to you,
powerful.
Kim.
Really, really powerful. And I really appreciate the story about in your household, how some of this is playing out right in front of you. And it goes well beyond financial services. It's looking, just as you said, at the full portfolio and how the phone itself is being used and how digital access is being used. So thank you really so much for that. I'm going to turn it over to our last, but absolutely not least respondent. And this is Isaiah. I'm going to introduce you and ask a question, and then I'm going to drop off for about 10 minutes for a medical reason. So I hope it's okay. I'm not being rude, but I'll be back. So would you please tell us a little bit from your perspective at FSD in Nigeria, what you're looking for in this particular study?
Thank you very much, Kim. And Daryl, thank you for this wonderful study at EFINA, Enhancing Financial Innovation and Access. One of the biggest things that we do is to release insights on access to financial services. And I strongly believe that the DPP kind of complement a lot of things, or even provide deeper highlights to some of the kind of work that we do. Our access to financial services survey, which we release every 2 years, is like the benchmark for understanding access to financial services in Nigeria. But then this is much more at a larger scale and at, I would say, more helicopter kind of view of what access to financial services looks like in Nigeria. And recently in Nigeria, the National Bureau of Statistics released a report that shows that 133 million Nigerians are multidimensionally poor. What does this mean? The normal poverty index would measure poverty by lack of access to income, but multidimensional poverty index then shows that beyond lack of access to income, what you can see is a poor person might not have access to insurance. They might not have access to healthcare. They might not have access to good nutrition. So it sort of shows that kind of view about what lack of access or what poverty means. I would say that the DPP is a sort of a multidimensional tool to understanding what lack of access to digital tool that can impede people's ability to make use of financial product or other product that could improve their life outcome. So it's a multidimensional tool, and it can be useful in many ways. The technology sector or the digital financial services institutions invest a lot of resources in user-centered design. And to a very large extent, the DPP sort of creates unique opportunity to understand the potential user of a digital financial product or service, as we may think about it. And if we also think about it from a regulator end or a regulatory perspective, it's important that regulators are able to grow at the rate at which financial innovations or financial products are growing, so that they're able to provide relevant policies or regulations to meet the need of innovators in the space. Now, what the DPP is going to do is that it's going to help regulators to even closely understand the kind of people, beyond the kind of organizations that would benefit from the regulations that they are making. So that brings a closer perspective and a human-centered understanding to regulators in terms of what type of regulation they can make, how the usage and all of this happens. And what's also very important, Nigeria, like many other countries, have typical behaviors when you look at different regions of the country. But when you look at the reality of individuals within different contexts, you would see that the barriers or the typical factors that affect their ability to have access to financial product or to use digital product, to have access to things that can improve their life outcomes, they're usually similar. And you could see that with this research. It kind of paints a picture of the true nature of the impediment that people face in terms of accessing or using digital tools. And then I like one of the points that was raised in this whole process. He sees the people that are involved more as a consultant, not just a study object, which is very important in the ability or the potential to delivering financial product or digital financial product or any product whatsoever that would improve the life outcomes of individual. It's important to make sure that we see the people that will benefit from this product as consultants in the process of developing this product. And overall, I think that in the nexus of accelerating the impact of financial inclusion and also considering the context of economic inclusion and financial inclusion, within that nexus, I think that the insight from this study would definitely help us to also, beyond understanding the numbers, it would help us to understand psychographic factors that could motivate people to uptake digital product to improve not just their own personal outcome, but the outcome of their household and the economy, both when we talk about meso level and then macro level economic outcome. So I would leave it at that and pass it on from here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you. And apologies again for Kim. She had suddenly a medical emergency sort of came to her phone. That was really fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your comments. And is it interesting that you go into product developers and policymakers, because one of the questions from the audience, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, is about how we might translate some of these findings to providers versus policymakers. And in the second part of this project, I mean, I haven't even gotten there yet, we are going to use this data to do workshops with providers mostly, but I think it should be policymakers. I also think it should be nonprofits who can deliver certain types of services and sort of some sort of digital comfort, digital empowerment, I don't know, service is sort of on my mind. Some of those things that like every citizen should know. Here's how to protect yourself. Here's how it, things like that. So we're hoping to work with a range of actors, but the question is, how do we do that? How do we plan to do that? And I'd love to hear from each of you who you think the most important actors would be that we would want to put this material in front of in your countries. Who are those actors? Because sometimes we make an assumption and we go, you know, so in Kenya, we'd say, okay, as long as we can get in front of a Safaricom, but like, who exactly, you know, it's like, Safaricom's really, really big. Like, and can we have influence? What do we need to tell them? So I'd love to hear any of your thoughts from the panel. Tamara, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So, I mean, okay, you've mentioned Safaricom, and they are the largest mobile network operator in Kenya. They're famous for having launched M-Pesa. And so I'm sure that the Safaricom team would be incredibly interested in this research. That said, they've got access to more data than you'll ever have.
Right.
And including some other, qualitative and interactions and things. And so I wonder whether actually policymakers might be a more important audience for this, to think about how are we ensuring that people are protected, that people are being enabled, that digital is actually unlocking opportunities. In Kenya, we've got a digital economy strategy, a digital finance policy, there's a lot going on. And yet, are those things really going to be tangibly helpful for people? And can this research point to, even small fixes that could have outsized benefit? And I'll just give an example from the past, where the Competition Authority actually made it so that fees had to be put on mobile money transactions before it was sent, right? And so even though that was very transparent, it was posted places, there were places you could find it, but there's a difference when you get it, this will cost you X, are you okay with that, before you push send? That kind of tweak, I actually think, is a great example of the kinds of policy changes that then will be implemented by the industry. And this research could point to more of those kinds of opportunities to really deliver more value to people through these digital tools. I see Kim's back. I don't know, Kim, are you?
Yes,
welcome back.
And I was able to hear what you all were saying. And Tamara, I really like your point about that. We're not necessarily all in this one room supply siders, and that we're not looking for digital fixes for everything. We're actually looking at protection in some cases. And I think that's a really important point, that are we really unlocking opportunities for people, or are we creating new problems for them by looking at their portfolios and saying, here's where we could do more digital. But actually it could be digital as a measure of reducing risk, not just adding more products and apps to their portfolio. Daryl, would you like to comment on that? Because I think that's really important. That what do we offer policymakers?
I mean, I think that I'm a big fan of the small tweak. I really am. I like it, and that's because I think we need to see changes as a journey. And oftentimes we're not entirely sure of where they're going to go. And it's very hard to implement very wholesale changes without a certain set of conditions. But Mehr, I'd love to hear from you. Please jump in.
Yeah, just a quick interjection on, you did mention that most of us are from the supply side here. And I just wonder if as a community, we give enough importance to development on the demand side, because there is this demand pull, right? So we can offer a service to people, but if they are hesitant and they have certain inhibitions, then how do we try and help them get over it? I think it's very important for us to even educate supply side, like specifically financial service providers, about the benefits of the economic. It actually makes business sense to develop your demand side, which is what the digital bank that I mentioned, it's part of their model, their delivery model. If they do not spend as much on the demand side, if not more, on helping onboard clients, helping them go through the onboarding process through a kiosk which is placed in a grocery store or somewhere, they realize that those clients won't come onto their platform. And in the beginning, they may need to do a little more hand holding, but after 3, 4, 5 iterations, then the person will start flying on their own. So I think the supply side people also need to be made more sensitive to, or need to be made more, need to, we need to make them believe that it really does make business sense to work on the demand side.
And just to add to that, I see a question here, which is the digital portfolios of the poor excludes, and this is from Sadia Siddiqui, the informal financial lives. And actually, the study does, but by design, it excludes that. But it's a good question, which is, Mina she goes on to say, they go on to say, Mina could have a mobile phone and a SIM registered in her own name and use it to receive her one-time COVID cash transfer Pakistan, and then continue to use non-digital financial services. So maybe that's the next step. That's not going to be answered inside of this study, but maybe that is the next step, is looking at the full portfolio, which includes digital and non-digital. I don't know what you have to say about that, Daryl, but I think it's an interesting comment.
Well, because this is sort of a digital portfolio, but DFS nested, that's why we're asking about all the digital financial tools that those people use. So we have blown out the financial side. So we do have saving in the house and informal borrowing and obviously savings groups, because we did want to do exactly what we did with Mina, which is to compare how people talk about it and what they do worry about. For example, saving in the house, kids can find the money, the money can go missing, etc. Yet it's right there. We're often trying to unpack the pros and cons of the different devices, the different ways that people manage their money and also interact with the digital world. We're constantly trying to think about the two-edged sword. There are benefits, there are weaknesses. How can we enhance the benefits if we really understand them? How can we mitigate the weaknesses? So, for example, back to your question at the beginning, Kim, what do women get out of being in the digital world? A really good one is the ability to participate and be informed more. So get more news is huge. Now I know what's going on. I can talk to people. That's huge. Now, what if you have a problem with misinformation? And what if suddenly, you're getting all this news, you're not sure if it's right. Now you don't know if you're stupid or if the news is not right. And you're not able to, so there are digital concerns, digital dangers, sort of, that are sort of dampening the promise, especially for women and girls. But we have those words from them of when it's going right, what is it doing for them? So we're trying to look at both, unpacking, like, what are you getting out of this? Versus what is not going so well. We're trying to look at both sides.
I'm seeing a couple of other, and please, this would be great if the panel would jump in too on some of these as well. Although the questions some of them are focused to Daryl. Panelists, please jump in. I'm hearing from Liz McGinnis that can this method be extended to ask questions that would get at the social norms influencing individuals? Is that kind of one of your goals, or is that something that would be a side effect of the original intent, or is that something for a future study?
So no, we're definitely trying to unpack that. In fact, you should be a little bit more invisible in the digital world, but at the same time, wait a minute, now you're a little bit more visible. Can you control your visibility? Here's where I think we're going to see a lot of differences in countries. Now, Sayonee mentioned this, being able to promote your products on digital platforms. Right now in India, so far, in some of the responses we've heard about in terms of a skit and how much exposure that might provide for a woman, there's a certain amount of disapproval of women doing that anyways because of that exposure. Forget the money, that comes first. In Kenya, I think We haven't seen all the responses yet, but there's a little bit more of a like, well, yeah, that's how you get ahead. That's how you become visible. There's a bit of more of an acknowledgement of, oh yeah, I'm going to build my network and this is how I'm going to get political power within my community and I'm going to grow my business. And how else would you do it? What are you talking about? And so that's, I think, where the country differences are going to be really, really interesting. And I think behind that is a reflection of how social norms are handled digitally and how they are handled in the physical world. And I don't know if anybody from the panel can expand upon that or wants to comment further.
Yes, Isaiah, I think we've got a response from you.
Okay, I think to some extent, the outcomes of from the research or the data from the research would sort of provide insight into what social norms look like. If you look at some of the audio that was played, you could see certain assumptions being made towards digital and compared to SH self-help groups. And the good thing about this is that those things come out subtly. People don't come out to you to say, this is my belief about digital, before you understand absolutely what their beliefs are. The way it comes is if you probably say, will you open a bank account on your mobile phone? And they're like, no, I don't want anybody to take all of my money. You sort of understand what the perspective are. So they would not say, this is my goal, my objective, my mission, and my vision as regards digital financial services. But there are certain things like, would you take a loan from a digital bank, or would you put your money in a digital bank? And they sort of tell you that, oh no, I heard of a fraud case that happened and for about 5 weeks is not resolved. So you know there is trust issue related to consumer protection. And you know that's some of the kind of themes that would come out from this type of thing. And I believe that the purpose of this is to focus on digital financial service, but there are a lot more insights that we could get that would be useful in even coming up with digital financial product services and how we could even pitch this to customers, or what it can inform in terms of recommendations to regulators or key actors within different sectors. So for example, even within the DFS space, you have associations that probably aggregate other digital financial services provider. This would be definitely a very useful tool for them. And even when you think about commercial banks in Nigeria, for example, that are already thinking of migrating into the digital space, and they have already structured entities like the Bankers Committee, it would be definitely very useful for them as they engage with member associations, which are individual financial institutions, or even if you now think of the more granular level, the microfinance institutions. Definitely, many of these institutions do not have enough fund to invest as much into R&D. And some of the insights that would come from this would definitely provide more information to them about their current customers or potential customers.
That is really valuable. And it leads me to another question here. Thank you, Isaiah, which is, and I think you're helping answer that, which is how, as a product digital service providers, how the ones that are already there, how can they contribute to this cause? The cause, I guess, of better understanding, you know, what's going on in people's digital portfolios. I think that's a really important question. Who are the people out there already that can contribute to this? And then there's also a regulatory question, which I can pose later, but Daryl, maybe you or any of the panelists could address that question.
I think, Tamara, you were...
just a quick one. Almost every digital financial service provider out there has a call center. I'm wondering if you could apply this methodology to their call centers and, you know, show them how it would work, and then see what, like this, you know, sentiment analysis and whatever could help point to where there are problems and where things could be improved. Because I mean, no provider out there wants to give bad service to their customers. They whether they're good at it or not, they want to serve their customers well, and this could be a new tool for them. Just a thought.
I think that's
Yeah,
super-
a lot of this method is comes from the natural language processing that happens in Indian call centers. So our NLP expert, Prabha Reddy, that's exactly his background. That's where the talent is. And you can get a lot more than you think. It's messy, but NLP goes through the mess really nicely. Yeah. Cool.
Daryl, there is kind of another side of the coin thing, and I'd like to ask this regulatory question, which is coming from Hawa Gambo. And the question is, I'm worried that the proliferation of digital financial services and products is running faster than the regulation. This is the case especially in Nigeria, where financial institutions take advantage of loopholes in regulation to deploy their services with a focus on profit and negative impact on customers. I don't know if they're focusing on negative impact, they're just trying to advance their own goals. How will this study contribute to strengthening consumer protection?
Well, I think there are big opportunities for the report. Like, I wouldn't say that DFS or financial institutions are taking advantage for negative impact. The truth is, if you look at many of the tech companies that is coming up now, not just in Nigeria, there are more software developers than financial or economic expert or social development expert. What that means is that the expertise would reflect in their output to get to the market. And they're just trying to get to the market. They're trying to make profit. They're trying to do things. And they do not necessarily have the regulatory understanding to do this. And it's a common factor in emerging markets to see that innovation is faster than regulators. And you could see things from the Central Bank of Nigeria and the Security Exchange Commission, for example, where they are trying to pilot regulatory sandboxes to also support new financial innovation to quickly test, get to the market, and also operate. So these are new instruments that would continue to help financial institutions. However, how can this sort of thing help them? Definitely, yes. When these regulators make the decisions, they think of the people that will benefit. That's the hallmark of all the decision-making process. And if they sort of have the understanding from this research, I mean, the outcome of this research, it can inform a lot of things in terms of what is being considered as the process to making policy, and also how they want to engage with the people that will deliver on these policies. At EFINA, we like to refer to ourselves a lot as the honest brokers, which means we have very good relationship with the operator and the regulator. I'm not sure that's a good position to be in, but I think what that does for us per time is to be able to take information like this or data from research like this to regulators and operators, and then create a conducive platform for both these parties to be able to have conversation and mutual dialogues to be able to then create long sustainable policies that would help the beneficiaries on the long term.
Kim, if I just very briefly, right? So because we have been speaking about, I was just thinking about what will be the right time. We have been speaking about financial service providers and digital service providers. I think in Indian context, the internet-based retail enterprises, you know, they also should be brought into the loop, because there's a huge usage of these kind of apps and services, and there's a lot of money that goes on over there by the users of the internet and the digital services. So just that point, yeah.
I think it's a really important point. And here's another question from Sadia Siddiqui, which is, how will the digital portfolios of the portfolio address the bane of non-registered illegal nano loans providers that have cropped up? and they certainly have crept up. All such calls are bound to have anxious pitch. This is an unregulated supply side provider. So how can this be in service to these pop-up and quickly vanishing digital providers? What's the role of this DPP study in that?
I think, a lot of what we're asking about are some of the key issues in each country. So in each country, we have 6 skits in particular. I mean, we're asking about the whole portfolio of any digital services. And in between, we're also asking about specific questions about how people feel or experience or are worried about with those different digital services. But then when we really dive in, we're doing that in the skits and the responses to the skits. And as you saw, so digital lending as a whole was definitely an issue to pursue in Kenya. Some of the skits are going to be similar, but we're trying to capture some of the sort of issues of the day that people can cotton on to pretty easily, and to do it in a way where you don't have someone just sort of stopping the conversation. In a way where both young and old and people from different segments are going to have something to say, but they're not going to say, well, I'm just going to cut this off because this shouldn't even be happening. So we're trying to characterize those skits to dig out some of those questions.
So Daryl, we are at closing time, and I just want to point out that I think this group has really unearthed not only questions for this particular study, but for future studies. And I think people are seeing how this method could be used well beyond this particular research question. Whether it's putting the same method into the private sector, who are probably already using some of it to gather data, well as NGOs, and then bringing it and surfacing it to the policymaker level. I'm wondering if you'd like to make a final comment about how both this method and the objective of the study could be used more broadly, and also when can we expect results from this particular study?
Well, let me, I mean, my hope is that there are many, many different use cases at Decodis. This is a methodology that we're establishing and expanding with a particular purpose to be complementary to other types of research methods. We're going to be, as I mentioned, we're collecting the last of the Kenya data right now. We're hoping that we can do a bit of an interim India plus Kenya, a little bit more results in sort of March and April, because we're finding it very helpful to have ongoing conversations. Because when you have this much data, and especially when you have open-ended data, you need to know what lens you're sort of putting, what is going to be the most helpful. We don't want to just provide insights that we find the most interesting. We want to know what would be the most helpful to move different actors in the market. And that's why I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to all the panelists, not only for their participation, for the audience, but also for the questions that are coming up and the perspectives coming up, and also to the audience for all of their questions, because given that we're right at the beginning, this helps provide a number of guideposts. So we're very, very grateful. Thank you. And thank you very much, Kim, as well, for jumping in here and managing a medical emergency at the same time. That was excellent juggling.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much, panelists. Your insights have been really helpful, and also the participants. This is moving the project forward, and I'm deeply grateful. So thank you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks very much.